Since January, we've been wrestling with this image of a house, or what it means to make a home. We've relied heavily on this image that Henry Nouwen, one of my favorite theologians, he draws when he says that we live in either the house of fear or the house of love. And the truth is, we build both of these houses and we oscillate between the two. Which, though, do you make your home? You have these two houses, but which one is your heart in? Which one becomes the place where you lay your head? Love or fear? Scripture loves to talk about these two, back and forth, love versus fear. There is no fear in love. Or as 1 John 4:18 says, there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. For fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not reached perfection in love. Or 2 Timothy 1:7, for God did not give us a spirit of fear, but rather a spirit of power and of love and of self-discipline. All of Scripture, really, Genesis to Revelation, is a call for us to make love our home. Now, I've never verified this, but Google tells me this, and apparently AI will tell you this too. I don't really understand the difference between the two, but they both arrive at this same conclusion. Do you know how many times both Google and AI count the phrase, do not fear, in the Bible? 365 times. Interesting. Now, is that a coincidence that one day for every year it says, do not fear? Yes, as a matter of fact, it's 100% a coincidence. It absolutely is a coincidence. But it's a good coincidence, as a matter of fact. What a neat thought that the Bible has something to offer our everydayness. And in our fear, the Bible reminds us we don't have to be afraid today. And it reminds us that we need reminding on the daily to not be afraid, to not fear. We can move into love. Well, that's what the Transfiguration story is all about. Today is Transfiguration Sunday, and we focus on this right before Lent at the end of Epiphany every year. And it's worth hearing this story again because honestly, it is unbelievable. Let's jump into it, verse 28. Now, about 8 days after these sayings, Jesus took with him Peter and John and James and went up on the mountain to pray. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face changed. Talking about Jesus. His clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. It's like out of a movie here. Suddenly, they saw two men. Now Star Wars has emerged. You got Moses and Elijah are talking to him. They are long dead, by the way. They appeared in glory and were speaking about his exodus, in which was about to fulfill in Jerusalem. I mean, it really is an unbelievable text. So Jesus takes 3 disciples, Peter, James, and John, up onto the mountain of Transfiguration. And then Jesus transforms into a glowing white. Moses and Elijah appear from the grave. It's unbelievable. I mean, it really shows us that there is always more going on in this world than what our eyes can see. The spiritual is actively engaging in the earthly. That's important. I mean, whether we realize it or not, the spiritual realm is all around us. It is alive and active, and Jesus reveals to us a deep secret that we all need to be in on. The secret is this: Jesus can operate firmly in both the spiritual and the earthly realms. Like we go into the house of fear and love back and forth, Jesus can operate in and out of the spiritual and the earthly. And if we can pay close enough attention to being a disciple, we can too, unless we are fueled by fear. Some people fear that what comes to us from God is dangerous. There's a 20th century theologian, his name's Rudolf Otto, I love him. He had a Latin phrase that he wrote about called the mysterium tremendum. It's Latin, there's no reason for you to know that, to remember that, but he argued this was in the 1920s. Anything that comes from God will birth two things simultaneously: love and fear. He also interchanges that with awe and fear. We are both in awe, in love with, while also afraid of what comes to us from the spiritual realm. And the fear comes from being uncomfortable with the unknown. And this is very true for the disciples in the text. Look at verse 32. Now Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep, but as they awoke, they saw his glory and the two men who stood with them. Just as they were leaving him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us set up 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah," not realizing what he was saying. While he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified as they entered the cloud. You hear that last line. They were terrified because they didn't understand what was happening. They were living in the house of fear because they weren't comfortable with the unknown. But let's be honest, if we were in this situation, don't act like you wouldn't be terrified either. I mean, this is a crazy moment. They went up onto a mountain with Jesus, and Jesus transforms into all white. And then saints of old show up, and then God's presence wraps around them like a cloud. And if you're not ready for that, it would most definitely be terrifying. You would think, this is how I die. So don't give the disciples a hard time. They are just like us in this text. But God does want us to see this text intentionally, though. Because if they would have been able to have been present in that moment and brought with them a sense of awe and wonder instead of fear, it would have changed the whole moment for them. And look at verse 35. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, and this is God's voice, "This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone, and they kept silent in those days, told no one any of the things that they had seen. So they hear the voice of God in the midst of the cloud. But then they go down the mountain, and they're still too afraid to tell anyone anything. Why? Because they were living in the house of fear, even though they had direct encounter with the divine love of life. This should tell us a lot. Fear is not something we can easily discard. There are just times when the spiritual realm interacts with us, but we're just not ready for it. And we miss completely the depth of the moment. What we don't need to do is what Peter does. He just rushes into the moment and just starts talking. He just doesn't even know what he's saying, says Scripture. He's just talking. And then he starts doing. Let's just build some things and name them, and this will be good for us. You need to learn that when you encounter the spiritual realm, the posture we are to take is awe and wonder. Experience the moment. Be present in it. Don't try to control it. Don't try to name it. Just be with it. And I think in order to do this, you're going to need better examples of depth in your life. You're going to need better practices that help you contemplate and to become comfortable with the divine. I think all of us need more mystery in our life, not less. And I think this is where the church has to come into play for people. I completely believe this. The church needs to offer people more mystery and not as much certainty. We need to invite people to sit in the awe-inspiring presence of God. Let it wrap around us like the cloud of unknowing for the disciples, and then we will hear the voice of God. But that can be fearful for people. It's mysterious. But if we can learn to see it through a lens of love, it'll transfigure us. I completely believe that true communal spirituality, a shared church communal experience, should be about training all of us to look into the face of mystery and welcome it, knowing that it comes to us from a good God. But this takes practice and discipline and a healthy sense of awe and wonder. You don't have to be afraid of God because God's essential nature is love. God comes to us in the house of love. And that's where I see culture. I think, honestly, this is where we struggle. I think all of us need to build a better capacity for awe and wonder. If you wonder about God, you won't fear God. You won't try to name God too quickly, but will experience the cloud that surrounds you in love. That's true for people too, by the way. If you wonder about people, you will hate them less. You will fear them less. If we wonder about people, we will learn to see them with a sense of awe. And I wonder how you learn to think that way. Or I wonder what life circumstances led you to think that way. A posture of inquiry and mystery will lead you out of the house of fear, and it'll lead you into the house of love. But like the disciples, if you're not trained with this, if you're not comfortable with the unknown, you will miss it. You'll stay rooted in the house of fear, and you will not engage people who are different or you wonder about. You will even begin to reject them. You will even begin to reject the mysteries of God. But if we could be people who develop the ability to sit in the awesome wonder of God, to take in the spiritual and let it bump up against our earthly encounters, then we will not feel like we need to rush in and to name it, or rush in and explain it, or rush in and dissect it or discard it. Then we could just experience the greatest truths that God has to offer. We would experience mystery, and then we would learn to name it as love. I really think if we're going to be people who truly are at home in who God made us to be, then we have to build the capacity and the spiritual practice to experience awe and wonder. Now, these thoughts may not feel like they connect to you, that awe and wonder help you feel at home, but I promise they do. It's how Jesus was able to travel between the spiritual and the earthly realms so easily, and it's how you can too. We have to develop the ability to sit in the unknown and believe that that which comes to us and emerges is both from God and good for us. To have the discipline will free us to love God better, to love ourselves better, to love others better. Do you see the connection now? If we're rooted deeply on the inside, spiritually, we'll feel at home in the earthly. And that's what Jesus is trying to offer in this story. He has transfigured what the earthly realm is and where the spiritual realm was. And he's bringing them together to create a new home. And you will learn to see it clearly if you can move out of the house of fear and into the house of love.